Hey everyone, welcome to another Advanced Sports Analytics application tutorial. In this video, we're going to be covering how to use our NBA Fastbreak projection and optimization tool, which can be accessed in the NBA drop-down menu. When you open up the tool, you'll first be presented with a Slate Settings tab where you can specify which site you're playing on and also what teams you want to consider in your optimal builds. The application defaults to show the teams that are active on any specific day. However, if you're playing a specific slate that doesn't use all teams, you can delete out the teams that you don't want to use in the input and select teams back in if you need to add teams to the optimal build pool. The next tab you can navigate to is the Actives and Inactives tab, where we specify which players are expected to be in or out on the given slate, and in the teams that you selected in Slate Settings tab. We try to pull updated injury information on a fairly regular basis each day. However, if there's values that we have not updated, like player expected to be out announced in, or a player expected to be in announced out, or we're maybe like projecting a questionable player to be out that you have confidence will be in, or vice versa. You can edit these values out just by double clicking on the expected active column values, and then you can just jump to different rows and specify a player in. So like if you wanted to I don't know, add like Ben Simmons in, you can just type in. Conversely, if you want to take a player that's in out, like if you wanted to pull Cam Reddish out, you can just type in out, and you can do like anything. I mean, you can do lowercase or uppercase. You just have to fully spell out the words out and in for the model to detect the changes that you made. And to lock any changes that you've made in screen, just hit Control Enter on your keyboard, and that'll lock in the values that you've changed. And then based on those in-out specifications that either you're using our defaults or editing the values, it'll then take those expected active and inactives players and generate team total projections based on which players are expected to be in and which players are expected to be out. And similarly, in this tab, you can edit the projections that we've made. So these are projections based on an internal model. However, if you want to change the values, you can maybe you just like want a different projection or disagree with the projected values that we have, or like I think there's use cases where you want to build lineups around a specific game script, and this is a good way where you can like change and kind of toy with projected team totals to generate lineups that are optimal or kind of optimize around a specific game script. So like if we wanted to build lineups optimized around the notion or likelihood that Miami just really blows out Charlotte, we could do that and juice up their team total from the projected 111.5 all the way up to 121, and then lock that in. And like those new values, both projected team total, projected game total, and the spread that's associated with the changes you make, will trickle down to the next tab, the player inputs tab, which specifies a set of inputs that feed into the final fantasy projection model. And these metrics, particularly the projected minutes, will be conditional on the values that you specify in the game macros tab. So in a very non-competitive Charlotte-Miami game, for example, we can see that Devonte Graham, one of the kind of top minutes getters for the Hornets, is projected now all the way down at 31.5 minutes, where if we had a much closer game, like let's say we were projecting Miami for that original 111.5 and then projected Charlotte for 109 and then lock that in, we would see Graham's minutes update to now 36.5, just a more competitive game for Graham means a higher projected minute. And that's typically the trend you see. Like team star players are going to be projected for more minutes the closer the projected, or kind of the smaller the projected spread is. And as projected spread as defined in the game macros tab uh, widens, we'll see some of the star players projected minutes trend down and some more role players filling those minutes. But it's not I wouldn't say like the model's so crude where it's just like star player, more minutes in competitive game. The minutes projection models is conditional, or is I guess structured for, or the model's structured specifically for players. So we use what's called a mixed effects model that identifies the relationship between minutes and a number of kind of game environment variables, and generates projections specific to that player's relationship with those game environment variables. But yeah, so then you'll be kind of the next I guess input or editing opportunity you would kind of go to is the player inputs tab, where you'll be presented with the inputs that kind of are app defaults to based on the default actives, inactives, and default projected game environments, or conditional on the edited values that you've input in these two tabs. And you can also edit values in this tab. So let's say you still wanted to hold that competitive game environment, but I don't know, had like concerns about Devonte Graham foul trouble. I don't know, maybe you like think Goran Dragic or something is like a tough matchup for him and could lead to a lot of fouls, and you might want to keep that competitive game environment, but still lower Graham's minute projection. And also in a hyper competitive game, maybe let's say we wanted to increase minute projection for a guy like Bam Adebayo. He's projected pretty high at 34 and a half, but let's say we wanted to juice that up even more. We could edit that in here. And then we also have access to like stat, I guess, ratios, what I'd call them. So like Devonte Graham's 35% assist rate. And let's say maybe we thought there was a good favorable rebounding matchup for Adebayo, and we wanted to increase his rebound rate from 17% to 25%. We could do that here and then lock these in, and the variables that we input will trickle down into the fantasy projection model. So that's how one way you can edit these values in these tables. Another way that I think I prefer to use is using a download CSV mechanism, and then editing within a CSV and uploading those edits into the projection system. So with just that, I just press this download button, and that generates for us this CSV of the exact table that you're viewing in in the application. And you can make edits in here. So like, let's say we want to lower Graham I don't know, back down to 34 and a half, or we wanted to make changes to Adebayo's projected fantasy points per minute. Maybe we are projecting him to get more minutes, but we think that his per minute efficiency will drop a little bit, and we can like make changes here. Sorry, not slash. And it's a good way to, if you're wanting to like really make a lot of changes to inputs for many players or various multiple players. I think the CSV route for me is a little more functional, but I'll kind of leave it to the user to figure out which editing mechanism makes the most sense for them. I think it's worth noting the CSV format or editing feature gives you the ability to remove players from your player pool. So what we're going to do is save this out and upload it back into the projection tool, and then it'll look through our CSV and make projections for players conditional on their values in the CSV. But like if we were to fully delete John Collins from our CSV, when we upload it back in, John Collins will be completely nixed from our player pool. And we have, locking like inputs where you can specify locks and fades. But I think like, for example, if we wanted to just fade an entire team, rather than typing in every player on that team in the fade input, we could just do some Excel work. And like, let's say we wanted to fade, I don't know, Dallas. We could filter on Dallas through Excel and then just delete all the Dallas players from our spreadsheet and then clear that filter so that we get all the players. And, now look, no more Dallas players. Like, we don't see any Porzingis or, Doncic or any of those guys. Let's see. And I'm just going to return Graham back to that 36.5-minute progression, 36.5-minute projection. And I don't know, we'll keep Bam at his kind of elevated minutes projection. And let's also juice up his rebound total. Again, maybe thinking have a favorable matchup. And another column to call out, and you can edit here in the CSV or also in the application interface itself, is this boost column. So we can increase kind of players' expectations through the inputs that we feed into the fantasy model. Or if we want to, we could just add a kind of crude like scalar boost to the player without editing any of their inputs. So I don't know, let's say we don't really want to try to do too much work figuring out how many minutes Young's going to play, or keep kind of his baseline inputs the same, but we just know we want to apply like a nice 15% boost to Trae Young. We could type that in here, and let's say we can also negatively boost players. So like, let's say we wanted to negatively boost Brandon Ingram by -5%. We could do that here. And yeah, so that's kind of all the editing we're going to do. So keep in mind, we did some minutes edits to, I believe, Adebayo, and we kept Graham the same. Did some minute and efficiency edits for Adebayo and applied just some negative and positive boosts to some players. And then we can save that CSV and upload it back into our application. And great. Now you can see we have Adebayo at that 36.5-minute projection with slightly lower efficiency. And, we have that boost on Trae Young, and we did the -5 boost on Brandon Ingram. We can see that over here too. So great. And now these values that we've edited are now going to feed into the projection model, and we will generate projections conditional on those new values. So we can see that Adebayo is holding that 36.5-minute projection, and Trae Young is showing up as a really high value, probably in part because of that 15% boost that we applied to him. And Brandon Ingram showing up as a reasonable, I guess, value, but still that value suppressed by that -5% boost we applied to him. And this is just showing like all players, not filtered by position. If you want to just look specifically at position, you can go through any of the position tabs. The only kind of feature I'd call out on these tabs is you can filter on stuff in these tabs. And I don't know, I don't like find too many of these filters useful, except for the salary. I think is kind of good. Like, let's say you are building your lineup by hand and want to find I don't know, the guy who's projected for the most raw points, and point guard is your last position that you're filling out, and you want to, you only have like 6,500 in salary remaining. You can put a numeric filter on this column, and now you're left with only players who you can actually afford in your build. Not that it's like that difficult to, I guess, like just sort on DKP and just scroll down to find, Schroeder as the highest raw projected player who's under 65, but still a nice feature, especially like, I don't know, if you're kind of filling a utility position and just have to sort through a lot of guys, could be useful. The kind of meat and potatoes of the application are the optimal lineups that are generated based on the projections that either are defaulted if you haven't edited any values, or are generated conditional on edited values that you made in the actives, inactives, game macros, or player inputs tab. and pretty straightforward. I mean, just generates optimal projections, optimizing for total fantasy points with constraints on salary, position, team limits, stuff like that. And you can specify how many optimals are built just in this input here. If you want to lock in a certain player, so I don't know, Ingram's we negatively boosted, but let's say we still wanted to lock him in. You can lock in Brandon Ingram and he would appear in all of our lineups. Or if you, I don't know, wanted to fade out a player, so let's say we just didn't want to include any Devonte Graham in our lineups, we could insert him in the fade section and we get no Devonte Graham. Yeah, and if you are doing MME and want to do like a bulk CSV lineup submission, you can download the optimal lineups and it'll output a CSV formatted for the site that you're playing in. So I think we're on DraftKings. So this would be DraftKings formatting with player name and IDs. So that's useful there if you are trying to do a CSV lineup upload. Last tab I'd call out is the exposure tab, which just shows how much exposure you have to all the players in your optimals. So, you know, 1 being 100% guys in all your optimals, 0.5 being 50%. So showing up in half your lineups, and just a useful way to kind of see which players you're gaining exposure to. Maybe you don't want too much of a certain player, like maybe you don't want that much Dennis Schroeder. You could, I guess, negatively boost him so that maybe you get a little less exposure to Schroeder. So like if we put negative, I don't know, 7% boost on him, maybe that would give us a little less Schroeder. Didn't look like it really had that big of an impact, but you know, something you can you know, work with and just use as reference to make sure you are getting the exposures you want to certain players and avoiding players you don't want that much of, kind of at a desired level. So that's the Fastbreak projection and optimization tool. If you guys have any questions on how to use it or recommendations for features you'd like to see added to the application, or you're trying some things that aren't working for you the way you thought it would, don't hesitate to reach out to us via Twitter or email, and we'll do what we can to help you guys out.